Thanks for remembering, Anna, or whoever remembered that. Let's see, I'm looking to see who, we start with a panel. I see Jeff is here. Great. And Becca's here, and is Sharon here? She was sick yesterday. I don't see Sharon yet, but she sent me notes, so I am going to put the agenda in. I have to do it in two parts because it said my message was too long. Right. Well, I think we'll get started. I just wanted to let you know that a little way through the meeting, I have to pop off for a short amount of time. And my colleagues, Anna, Jen Severance, and Dawn, is Dawn here today? Yes, okay. We'll facilitate the portion of the meeting I have to hop on, and then I'll be back on for sure. So the first part of our meeting today, just to look through the agenda, is that we have invited three members of the Universal Pre-K Implementation Committee to this part of the meeting, and we provided them with some questions that were part of the agenda, and they are going to sort of talk through that and share anything else they want to share with you about their experience being on the committee from fall until this point. And then we'll have time for questions and discussion. And then following that, Don Rouse and maybe some of the other Child Development Division folks are going to talk about the Quality and Capacity Incentives Program and give an update on that, talk a little bit about where the design is, and then we'll finish our meeting just really doing some reflecting what might be some action items. We will begin the process to forming our policy recommendations for 2025 to the State Advisory Council and BBF in May. So there may be some things we hear today that we want to make sure are on that list of considerations. So all of those things are what we will start with today. Sharon is here. Yay. I hope you're feeling better, Sharon.
My apologies.
No, not at all. It was very good, kind of you to write up all your notes and send them just in case. So that was great. So I think we'll start with our Universal Pre-K panel, and we will start with Jeff O'Hara. And Jeff, you can give yourself an introduction and talk about your role, and we'll just start from there, and then we will go to Becca and then Sharon. And I think it makes sense to have everyone share, each of the panelists share. If you need a clarifying question, maybe put that in the chat, but let's have all three of our panelists speak, and then we'll have our discussion and additional questions.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Sherry, for having us. So Sherry, does everyone kind of know the questions that we're answering, or should I just kind of go off the...
They were in the agenda, Jeff,
Okay.
But if you want to maybe you could state them if you wanted to before you answered, that's fine too.
Yeah, so kind of I have three standalone private programs in South Burlington, and then we run a complementary program at Richmond. So the Richmond Elementary School has their preschool, and we offer supplemental programming down there. And some families have chosen to have us be the primary preschool option down there. So we have three standalone programs and then one school-based option. And you know, the reason why I asked to be on the committee is just to make sure that the private provider sector was well represented, and I kind of have a belief that you can't complain about something unless you're part of the work that goes into it. So I just really wanted to be part of the process. I look at our main role right now is figuring out what the capacity is in the private sector and the public sector. And when we really began to look at what does capacity mean, I think everyone's first intuition is, do schools have space to provide the services that are outlined in the universal preschool model that the legislature is putting forward? But it really goes beyond that. And, you know, we have, as we looked into capacity, it's not only space, it's geographic location. Where in the state might space be even more hard to find than not? Teachers, kind of how many licensed teachers do we have? Do we have the capacity to have an increase in preschool openings without having the licensed teachers there to provide the service? Transportation, accessibility, the full day option is also coming up. Part of my role as well, I guess, just by happenstances, that I also do after school programming for school age kids. So that extended day is a really important part for us to consider. And kind of going through that list and that process has been more interesting and eye-opening, kind of as we uncover the layers of the onion, so to speak, is that there's a lot to consider whether or not this makes sense moving forward. I would say that the other piece that has come to the surface a little bit more is that our charge is really looking at 4-year-olds and creating a universal system for 4-year-olds. And I know that a lot of people on this committee here today would agree that it goes so far beyond the 4-year-old. So at what cost, if we move forward with the 4-year-olds, what are the unintended consequences for the 3-year-olds, the 2-year-olds, and so forth down the line? So those are the big questions that I see moving forward: the capacity, and then the unintended consequences that we may not be thinking about right now. But I'd like to hear from Becca and Sharon, and then if they stir up anything more in my head, I'll jump back in. But thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Becca?
Jeff, you're speaking my language. I'm nodding along with you.
Thank you.
So for those of you that I don't know, but I think I do know everybody, I'm Becca Webb, and I'm a Universal Pre-K coordinator. And I have a region of 10 SUs kind of down the midline of the state. So I sit on the systems work group. And so our work group is Jeff Francis. So he's a representative from the Superintendents Association, so the statewide organization. Janet McLaughlin from CDD is on our work group. Colin Robinson, who is the NEA rep, so the Union for the Public School Teachers, Renee Kelly for the Head Start rep, and myself. And our committee is really tasked with looking at what systems changes would need to occur. So we're looking at what needs to happen at the local level in terms of, like, Jeff, what you said, right? Like, is the SU ready for this? And what needs to be considered within that realm? We're looking at, are there pieces of the state where things need to change or be implemented or are working really well around the effectiveness? So again, really lining up with Jeff's committee's work around, you know, is there capacity? Are there licensed teachers? Are there buildings? What does our geography mean towards education across all our PK to 12s? We're tasked with thinking about the transition for those 3-year-olds out of a UPK system into a PK4 system. And we're really looking at making recommendations around the oversight. So would we do a dual oversight? Would we recommend that we would do a dual oversight? Would we recommend that one branch agency, state agency would take it, or would there be a different whole new thing? And so we've really been talking about what does this mean? Our committee has decided that we were going to determine questions and then really gather our information from the field. So not that we're not looking at like data sources, but our committee is really looking at what's being said in the field, what's the, kind of organization within the field. So rather than counting number of licensed teachers, we're really having these conversations. And so we're having conversations that are talking about value needs. We're having conversations about practical needs. What would it take? We're having conversations that incorporate the legal piece. We're having conversations around the systems oversight, the transitioning 3-year-olds. And then I added a 4th one in a meeting yesterday. And because of the sheer amount of information that's coming up, concerns, capacity, what's good for kids, that 2-3 onward question specific to special ed students, we're looking at that question as well as a separate question. So that's really where I'm driving the conversation and bringing information forward. And I can put all of that either in a link, or Anna, I can send it to you to include in the notes, because that's a lot. Sharon, I think I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks,
And,
Becca.
and I will put the language from the Act 76 legislation related to the universal pre-K work group in the chat, just for anyone that's not familiar with it, or is familiar with it but hasn't read it in a long time. Thank you, Sharon.
And sure, absolutely. And I think that it's as you listen, it's probably really obvious, like this is very complex. It's a lot of important information that's needed to be able to inform this report. And because there's so much work, these work groups, are doing things independently and then coming together. But it's still easy to bleed into the conversations that other work groups are focused on, because it's all so interconnected. And I think that's one of the pieces that makes the conversation so rich. And we have to keep kind of pulling ourselves back and saying, well, actually, there's folks focused on that. So for the committee, I'm representing Vermont AUIC, and I feel responsible to think about our members and, the needs and perspectives of the broader early childhood educator workforce, as well as programs. As you know, Vermont AUIC administers many of the professional preparation scholarships and licensure resources that which are tied to ensuring a well-prepared workforce, as well as Sparks, which is focusing on the continuous quality improvement. And we know that high quality is critical for UPK, and that's also tied to STARS. And so our Sparks work is connected to helping programs become pre-qualified partners. So it feels like a lot of different perspectives that I can bring through our connections with all of the folks that we interact with in our programs. And so I'm serving on the program quality considerations work group. And so our work group is charged with exploring and documenting to the broader committee things related to like benchmarks and best practices to ensure high quality UPK, special education services for those participating in UPK in public and private settings. And then as we keep sort of hearing as the theme, like special education services for children who are 3. And then also I heard Becca mention oversight of the pre-K system. So those are the pieces of our scope. And the committee members that I'm working with are Morgan Crossman from Building Bright Futures, Corrine Harvey, who is a family representative, Erica McLaughlin, who is with the Vermont Principals Association, Teresa Pollner, Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association, and Sheila Quinville, who is a representative from a pre-qualified program. And so the things that, are in my mind when we're having these conversations, and the committee, all agrees, like Vermont is already recognized nationally for the UPK system that we have. And we're really thinking about, we want to continue to elevate that, like, this is an opportunity to build upon our successes. And, we're hoping that the full committee and, prioritize what's already working well and use this time to identify the specific areas where we can focus on improvement. And so some of the things that we're are asking and researching is like, what does the current research say about the best practices and benchmarks for high quality? How is Vermont doing in relationship to these? And what are other states doing that we could learn from? And, where can we just build upon the existing quality systems, and where might we need improvement? And so our work has really, our work group has sort of spent some time digging into that. And then our next priority is thinking about oversight, because that really does tie to when you're talking about equity and consistency. And, we continue to wrestle with, like, there's like broad agreement that additional hours and greater accessibility for publicly funded high quality early learning is beneficial. But we have this tight timeline and the data limitations as we're trying to compile this picture. And, how do we ensure, I think I heard Jeff mention, like, the workforce capacity, like, how do we ensure equitable access if we're, thinking about what are the qualifications for our early childhood workforce, and in this moment in time when there's already a struggle, and what supports are going to be necessary to ensure that we have high quality, early learning, which is tied to teacher preparation. And then what happens to the 3-year-olds, and what, how are families impacted, and what are the supports that are going to be required? So it is, it's an incredible conversation, and there's a lot to talk about for sure.
Sherry,
Thanks.
I just wanted to add 2 more things. One is that I think that we also have to acknowledge what's happening in the legislature right now as it relates to school funding. And I think that we just have to name that, and wondering how that's going to affect decisions down the road. I think it was probably, if they saw it coming, they probably didn't see it in the magnitude that it's happening right now. So, and I failed to mention the people that are on the capacity and funding work group with myself. So Sherry is with us on the committee, or the subcommittee. Nicole Miller with Vermont After School. Chris Wells is a parent rep. And Sherry, what role is Sandra Cameron? Is she?
Vermont School Boards Association.
Awesome. Thank you.
So before we open it up for discussion and questions, I wanted to acknowledge we did invite Corinne, am I saying her name right? Anna, to come, and she tried super hard to come, and maybe we could make some space for her in May if she's available, because she really tried hard to switch up her conflict and she couldn't find a way to do that. And I thought I would just show everyone the timeline of the work. So we have this Universal Pre-K Implementation Committee that was designated by the legislature, and it specified who needed to be on it, and all of that is in the legislation. And then we have this timeline that I thought might be helpful to share. And I was just going to pull that up just to show. So the decision was made by the co-chairs and the facilitator that we would, you could see the other slides too. Anyway, that we would work in work groups, that it was such a comprehensive question or charge that we should probably divide into these work groups. So we've just heard from the 3 representatives from the work groups. So right now the work groups are meeting. They each have, questions that they're grappling with, what their role is in terms of making a recommendation. The work groups will meet through June, and at that point, the idea is that they'll start to be a draft report that, that the committee will begin to respond to, try to build consensus around, parts of the report. I think the idea is to, in late summer, review it with groups like this and get more feedback and, revise it in November, and I believe it's due the 1st of December, the report to the committee. And what would happen after that is if there were going to be any changes to Vermont's universal pre-K system, those would have to go through the legislature. So that would be, if there were going to be changes, that would be the way in which changes were made to our universal pre-K system. So let's open it up for just questions, discussions. There may be, I'm looking around real quickly, others of you who have either attended the public meetings or are on the committee. If you want to ask a question or share any information.
Sherry, can I just pop in before that? I think one of the things that, not to speak for anybody else on the committee who's here, but I think that one of the pieces that's really critically important for you all and for our broader early ed folks in the field is really to get involved at whatever engagement level you can give to this. They are public meetings. You can attend the public meetings. There are notes that are posted. There's a really comprehensive webpage, which is actually updated all of the time, and has the links to the meetings, has the links to the notes for both the full committee and for our work groups. So I would say, you know, we're all really busy people, but whatever level of engagement, the recordings of the meetings are not publicly posted because they don't meet accessibility standards. But if you do an individual request, you do not have to do a public, you don't have to do a public information request. If you do an email request, you can get a copy of that. So if that format is easier for you, and all of the committee members and our work groups and our emails are all listed on the webpage. So if you have information or want to get engaged or want to find out more, like, this is key that you do whatever engagement level you can, because it's a huge system and it's really complex, as all of you know. Sorry, Sherry, I just felt I needed to like drive that point home.
Yes, and thank you for reminding all of us about the recordings, because they are available. They just didn't have the capacity to meet the accessibility guidelines that you need to post them publicly. So they're not secret. It's just you just have to request, and it's pretty simple to do that. If there's any particular recording that piques your interest. Public comment for the full committee is always in the beginning of the meeting. And those meetings, Becca and Jeff, they're like a regular day, like they're a regular day. Do you remember what they are? But it's at the
second Tuesday, it just happened. Second Tuesday, 9:30 to 11. I'm going to put the website.
Thank you.
Going to put the
Becca,
website with all the info in the chat.
And then you'll have the link. And so if you ever want to attend and you can only attend a short time, public comment is in the beginning. So you could give your public comment and then go on with the rest of your day as well. So let's see what questions, those of us that are on the committee probably have so much information. It's hard to know what to share. And so we may have confused you more, hopefully less, but if you have any questions or discussion, now's the time. Diane?
Thanks. And thanks, Becca, for sharing the links and everything, and reading the minutes. I had a couple of questions. One was around what the conversation looks like in terms of mixed delivery models and where's the room or space for that conversation. And then also in the minutes from, it was from the March 19th meeting, there's under that conversation with Katie Selena, and that there were a number of questions that continued to pop up and bubble up. And I just wasn't sure at what point, I know it's not easy to access the data, but I think as you were saying, Becca, it gets at kind of the boots on the ground conversation around what does it look like and that. And so wondering how are those questions going to be answered or at least considered as we move forward?
So I will comment on the data part. So what Katie Selena was able to share with us was programs based on licensed UPK programs that have met the criteria. So number of programs, and then also number of spaces, desired spaces, and where. So that's all that the data that she, in partnership with the Child Development Division and, you know, looking at other data sources, is able to share. What I understand is that the facilitator is going to work with the agencies to try to dig deeper and get more specific enrollment. So we know that almost 60% of the UPK spaces are in private programs. And we know by county, like in some counties, it's like 75% of the children are served in private programs. And in other counties, more of the children might be served in public school. And in some counties, there's only like one private program in the whole county. So we know a lot of things about that, but what we don't know is actual enrollment. And they were working on strategies to get us a little more information about the enrollment, because that directly relates to certainly the capacity and funding committee in terms of, you know, what is the capacity if we went to full day pre-K for 4-year-olds, what is the capacity to do that? Where kids are. We know how many 3-year-olds are in the system. We know some data, but we have more digging to do. And what I understand is they're going to look at what are the essential questions and try to find some strategies to get us a little more information on that. And Becca or Jeff, do you want to comment on the mixed delivery?
I can address it in that we've been having this conversation. So the UPK coordinators, and the invite went to UPK coordinators with the understanding that they were inviting anybody else they wanted to do the conversation. We met this past Tuesday as well. And this was a huge part of our conversation, was thinking about when we talk about full day with our school district hats on, we really recognized that that's not a family full day, and the need for before or after care. And then we started talking about, you know, all of these other pieces of, are we duplicating this system, right? We already have full day programs. What are the pieces? And we got into a really extensive conversation about what would it take to do a true full day program, and what were the benefits of already that mixed delivery system. We also had conversations about like buildings and capacities and facilities and structures. And to go back to Jeff's point that he brought up earlier, that geographic piece, that for school districts to be able to have that capacity, we're really talking about parents or the school district or both transporting kids to a central location within your district versus your elementary schools in many parts of our state, just due to numbers or geography or teachers or, you know, those sort of things. So our systems group is meeting tomorrow afternoon. Those notes from that meeting will be posted, but might not be posted tomorrow because I need to make them pretty. But that did come up in our group, just from a resource perspective, much less, like, we didn't get into partnerships. We didn't get into like agreements and contracts, and we didn't delve that deep into that piece. But Jeff, I hear that your group is having many conversations on this.
Yeah, and there are so many reports and data already out there trying to filter through it all, and then even realizing that there's still missing information. So I guess the hard part for us is that when we look at capacity, we usually look at license numbers, and license numbers only give us one slice of the pie. I think most centers license for what their full capacity would be, but in actuality, they may have a fraction of the number of kids versus their license capacity. And then on top of that, there's programs that only offer a half day, or they only offer until 3 days a week, 3 days a week full time, 3 days a week half time. So really trying to figure out what is the true capacity, and what does that mixed delivery model system look like. We need the information first before we can create a plan for the latter, I guess. And so we have, to Becca's point, we've been talking about it a lot, but every time we meet, we have more questions at the end of the meeting than we have answers. And I know that that's not helpful to anyone in this group right now, but that's kind of, we keep uncovering things that we don't know, unfortunately.
The other piece, Diane, the larger work group, the whole committee, talked about the numbers and the duplication that anecdotally, some of us track it, some of us don't track it. But anecdotally, there's a lot of children who attend private community programs that are UPK qualified. So they're sitting in those UPK slots. If we look at the database from the CDD, so the CDD shared the numbers of slots in UPK programs. But what we know anecdotally is that there are children who are in those slots who actually go to public schools to receive their UPK funding, taking one of those slots, and then also either half days or rest of week, depending on kind of that schedule quirk, right, go back to their private programs. So one of those pieces that Jeff's talking about that we don't know is, are there really more slots than we think that there are? And is it a matter of matching people's needs? And I should say that our UPK coordinator group talked a lot about it's really hard to make decisions and engage in the conversation when we don't have whatever the reality of this looking like, because that changes what each player, each stakeholder in this needs to do, right? We can't talk about how many families would actually take advantage of this and enroll until we know whether aftercare would be required, or until we know would it be 5 days, right? Or any of those sort of things.
And I'll just piggyback, that I think it's, as we talk about the mixed delivery system, I think that there have been lots of conversations in subgroups, in these work groups, as well as with the broader group, about, how important it is for families to, to be thinking about that family perspective, which Becca, you just referenced. And we, our group had a presentation by NEAR, and it was highlighting the research related to, extended day, having a greater impact than half day. So there's value for sure. And, that the mixed delivery system can really increase family choice to select the environment that they prefer. And I think that Renee Kelly, representing the Head Start Association, had a really excellent point yesterday or 2 days ago, whenever we met last, about all of when you're thinking about equity versus equal, and families with children who need these services the most, and how all of the challenges for transportation and all of the other supports that are necessary, and and the variety of settings. So I mean, it is so deep, and and yes, we have the data, but we also have a lot of the philosophical conversations, which I think also are making this charge challenging to to be sure that we have a comprehensive picture to share.
I just wonder if I could also kind of chime in. I think also siblings, like co-location is key. I mean, we have that I think all of us keep seeing that consistently, that it's really convenient for parents, there's ease of access, and especially, you know, if there's multiple, if there's like a pair of twins and then a child who's older, and just having sibling co-location and like ease of access is important. I think when Sharon was just talking about equity as well, and I think transportation is huge. A lot of parents, everyone's already said it. I'm not talking from a public pre-K lens. I'm talking from an early care provider, you know, licensed center, having opportunities for transportation, like midday, you know, parents that work full-time, and also the summers and through school vacation. So year-round care and needs, and especially if there's a younger sib, they have no place for their older child. So just putting the kind of the whole family in the picture, which is like a parent-child center approach.
I see Sonia's question in the chat, and I can, she just asked about how can we get the accurate information. At the capacity and funding subgroup, we've talked about creating a survey that goes out to all public providers and private providers. What we're worried about is the duplication of surveys and really getting at the questions that we're asking, that we're needing information for. So we are drafting a survey to send out to people. Personally, I kind of want to go and try to hit every school in the state and really have personal conversations, because it is so complex, but I know that that's not possible. But I think that a lot of public and private providers have been asked similar questions numerous times over the last few years, that we don't want to burn too many bridges with asking what they think is the same question. So we're really trying to dig through the data and figuring it out.
Meg, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I just had a comment really. One of the things that I think has been really hard in framing this conversation is coming together on what are the principles of child development that we really all agree on. And Becca knows this, and probably other members of the group know this, but I started working on what are the best practices that could frame this conversation. As we're thinking about those conversations with folks who, many of whom don't have a solid grounding in early childhood development and what best practices in this field look like. So I'll drop a link to those in the chat, and you can feel free to use as you like.
Lori, I think you were next, or you were first, but go ahead.
Thanks so much, and thanks to the committee for taking this work on. I know this is a heavy lift. Like, I know this is multifaceted and complex and challenging and exciting too, right? So I guess I just, I'm raising my hand because I think it's really important to bring the child's voice into these discussions. And I hear us talk about what families need, and I hear us talk about what programs need, and I hear us talk about, what capacities there are and different, how are we going to transport children. And I guess I just want to, and I know you're all thinking of this, but I would be remiss to not say something. This continuity of care component. And what would the child say if they're sitting at the table in these conversations? And the care component that we see children get in private programs that isn't always possible in public education systems. And I just think it's, when I think about all of the, that we are able to offer as a private program compared to like what might be readily available in a more public setting, and it's nobody's fault. Like, I'm not saying this with judgment or blame, right? But like, we also have that continuity component of building relationships with the families, with the number of hours that children need to be in with their care providers for working families, all of these things, right? And if I'm the child, right? And we know that in all programs across the state, we have an increase in children with specialized needs. And so if I'm a child, and maybe I'm a child that has specialized needs, and I'm already seeing, however, multiple people in my day, right? What does that look and feel like for a child who's 3 to 5 years old? And I just think it's important to remember to elevate that voice.
Lori, I really appreciate you saying all that, and it's definitely at the forefront. I think one of the things that I personally am challenged with, and I'm not going to speak for Sharon or Becca, but really separating out the charge of the committee versus what we know is best for kids, and it's come up numerous times, and I think that it's impossible not to look at what's best for kids and question the charge of the committee. So I think that we are trying to keep the kid voice at the table, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. I appreciate you saying that.
I think two points. I think one of the pieces I really want this group to hear is, while there are many, many folks on the committee who do not directly work with children and don't have kind of the early ed child development, family development background that we do, there are an overwhelming number of us that have done this work for many, many years and are both, one, informing our other committee members who don't have that lens. I don't want to think about school construction and how many buildings we need to build. That's not my deal. But we're both sharing our knowledge about early ed, and just that people who don't do this work every day and aren't grounded in it every day as a lens are also being curious about this piece. So I think, well, folks are not all grounded in this work that are making decisions or making recommendations. It is really a deep conversation. The other piece that I just want to add into the conversation, and I don't know, Anna, how we're doing on time, but the other piece I wanted to add into this is we also, not quite yet, I don't think she's confirmed yet, but we have a brand new ed secretary. And so, when we're talking about, there's already all these funding changes, there's already all these legislative changes in the general conversation about how we educate kids in Vermont. I think that her lens and her interaction with the legislature may change or drive the questions. And so that's a huge piece of what I'm curious about is, you're coming from a different state with different priorities and with different ways that things are run. So what's the advantage into that conversation, and what's the no, what we're doing really, already kind of exists. And so how do we combine new blood and new ideas with what we're doing? And how does that affect all of those education decisions in Vermont right now, discussions in Vermont right now? Amelia's got her hand up.
Hey, everybody. I'm listening to this conversation with a lot of reactions, and really happy to hear everybody's perspective and what you're working with on the committee. I also have to hold, after following very, very carefully how this committee came to be, how the charge happened, and at what point of the Act 76 legislation where this committee was developed. It wasn't developed in the Senate, it was developed in the House. That this committee, the way that my lens is looking from that information and knowledge, is that this is not a committee creating what will be, but this is a committee that's creating what it would look like. So that when Lori raises that question, when I hear Jeff responding with his heart, and also Becca, we're thinking about the child's voice. Those parts of the conversation are vital, because we're not creating what will be, we're creating what's the possibility. What happens when you take what we know from children's education. NACCE's been around since 1928. We're not new to the table here, thinking about what these things look like. So I'm really glad you're holding up those questions, Jeff, and I encourage you to continue to do that, because there are many people that still think of us as babysitters or whatever, ... So your voice holding up that perspective of early ed is so very, very, very important. And I'm very grateful that you're doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's one of the, I think fortunately I'm very opinionated, and it's hard for me to hold my tongue. So I will advocate till the end that that there's great stuff happening on all sides. But
Mhm.
that we can't be blind to what's happening in the private sector, for sure.
Right. And I just want to add one more thing. When I look at this, I don't know if the committee is looking at workforce in terms of program directors, but if we create this, if it does happen, then what happens to the field of the program director? And all those people that are in that role that are running private programs. That's a workforce, something to take into consideration. Do they go by way of the travel agent? Anyway, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Amelia, I'm going to sidecar you and have a conversation about program directors. And I think that from my experience with a public school lens versus my experience as a program director, we are having several side conversations around the need actually to have stronger knowledge within the school system of the vein of the program director credential and requirements. And so my answer would be, no, there's still going to be that need. My other thought would be, how can current program directors and school people work together, right, to improve and strengthen that piece? So not specifically related to Act 76, but I think there's a whole lot of knowledge that we have as an early ed community. And I think whoever put it in the comment, it looks like maybe Diane, it was you, but like, this isn't an us or them piece, right? This is a like, whoa, like opportunity to redesign the system. And whew, like, this is heavy and hard and not conversations that are easy or pleasant to have. Some of our committee meetings are a little tense and meltdown, especially
Good.
like
They should be. They should be. But I'm so glad Lori brought it up. What's the voice of the child, and how do we use what we've already learned? I know there's lots of data about quality, high quality outcomes, but we've been doing them for decades, right? So I really do love that the conversation's happening. I just want to put in the perspective of, this is not a done deal. This is a conversation. And I agree, it is a good conversation to have.
Are there any other questions for our participants or each other? Yes, Michelle, I also had wonderful, wonderful childcare providers and teachers, and I'm so grateful for their assistance and support and knowledge. Meg.
Guess I have a question about, I know the charge of the committee, and I know that the thing that I keep hearing from stakeholders in the early childhood world is that the charge of the committee is not necessarily in agreement with everything that we believe. I'm wondering, because I know that the ultimate charge is to come up with some legislative language that can be debated, by the legislature. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for the committee to put together, what the legislature has asked for and provide some supplementary information to the legislature about this is what we were asked to do. And we're not all in total agreement that this is the direction we want the field to go.
I will jump in and say, having an external facilitator has really made things move forward in a much more productive way than the initial meetings, because there was that tension, and there continues to be that tension. And I am not sure, maybe someone has more information than I do, but I think that all of the conversations are being captured, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a part of the report that's like, ongoing questions, but possible impacts or unintended consequences. I mean, like, we are talking just 4-year-olds, and we continue to talk about like 3-year-olds. Like, we just can't stop ourselves. And so I do think that there is the opportunity for the report to include some of these other pieces that people feel, in the conversation, feel really concerned and committed to. So, but Becca and Jeff, I feel free to like weigh in or piggyback on what I've just said.
I'm just going to say that I know of specific legislatures who stalk that website and read those minutes. And I wouldn't be surprised if they ask for the recording. So, well, the charge is to write a report. I know that there are people who are following the conversation. And I feel like, Sharon and Jeff, remind me, but I feel like this was part of the conversation that we had at the end of the meeting on Tuesday. So many meetings around there are so many external conversations that we're having, that could we have a parking lot that would make its way, maybe not in this recommendation document, but attached to it. I feel like we talked about that Tuesday. Maybe I'm just confused.
And the only thing that I would add is, Meg, I completely agree with you. And there's been so many times where I wish we could do a mini presentation to the House and say, here's all of the things that we've learned. Is the charge still the right charge? And can we have some thoughtful discussion around what should the question to the committee be? And but knowing that probably won't happen, I do like your idea, and I do agree with Sharon and Becca that all of the discussions are in the notes, and I think we just have to be thoughtful of how we present our recommendations at the end. But I do, so many times I wish we revisit the actual charge.
Well, I want to thank Becca and Jeff and Sharon for coming and sharing their insights and lessons and questions that they are thinking about and grappling with. It is a big, big, big ask that the legislature gave the implementation committee. So thank you for taking on that really challenging task. Yes. Thank you for shouldering this work, says May. Yes. We appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to move us along. Now you get to listen to me talk for a little bit about the quality and capacity incentive. You'll probably hear me say several times that this is brainstorming. There is nothing about what I'm about to show you that is set in stone. I liken this to, I think I said this to Anna, Sherry, and Jen, that this is like the closet I've got behind me, that when friends come over, I just shove everything in that closet and shut the door. So it's very messy. And really what I'm asking today is for your feedback. What are your thoughts? You're going to see the legislation statement, and then I have them tagged as ideas because we truly are trying to build this right now. Readiness is coming to an end, and so we're able to give our attention to quality and capacity. I'm sorry that Courtney had to jump off. She's been critical in these discussions as well. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen and hope for the best. Oh, let's see. Did I get it on the first go? No, sir. I got it on the very first go. Okay. Oh, I'm trying to present from the beginning. Okay, here we go. So as others, I don't see the chat when I'm doing this. So please, someone help me, Anna, help me with the chat. And I'm not going to be taking notes because I'm going to be talking, but I am going to go back in the recording. So as we're having these discussions, please do give your thoughts. So here is it again. I'm an old style teacher with my webs. So this is just brainstorming, nothing in stone. It's actually more in mud during mud season. So let's go to the charge in Act 76, which is that we shall establish a childcare quality and capacity incentive program for childcare providers participating in the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. Excuse me. This is important. So this is really targeted to those programs involved with CCFAP. The first charge in this statute is that we're going to achieve a higher level in the quality rating and improvement system, including increasing access to and provision of culturally competent care and multilingual programming, and providing other family support services similar to those provided in approved Head Start programs. So as you can see, that's a really small and easily done task. This is breaking down into a couple of different areas. Go to the next one. And here are some ideas we have in a big messy chart. Maybe a yearly payment at the submission of an annual report based on the STARS level. So thinking when I write add-ons possible, is it that I'm just going to use amounts that mean nothing, that are just easy for me to remember. Maybe you get $1,000 at your resubmission and your acceptance of your CQI. If you're a specialized childcare, you get $1,000 more. Maybe we're tiering these. If you're a 3-star, you get $3,000. Like this sort of tiered once a year payment that is tied to the submission of the STARS CQI, the submission and the acceptance of the STARS CQI. We're looking at maybe a larger incentive payment for increase in STARS. I think right now it's around $1,000, depending on where you are on the spectrum. Maybe that's a $5,000 incentive payment when you jump in an increase in STARS. Maybe we also give you an incentive payment at application or reapplication during your cycle of STARS and CQI. We want to make sure folks are utilizing the Sparks. And in every one of these categories, we're looking at TA that is associated with achieving these goals. So we want to make sure that we're also financially supporting the TA that helps folks improve their quality. So I'm going to pause after each one to kind of give folks a chance to comment or give me feedback.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Oh, sorry, Claire, you raised your hand just right the way I'm supposed to do. Okay. I am curious. So it sounds like we're looking at, just so that I fully understand what we're looking at here, is the idea of like, what are the external rewards, extrinsic motivation component for participating? in this,
Yeah.
yeah, for increasing quality. I'm wondering if there's a balance here between like, how are we fostering intrinsic versus extrinsic? Are we going to rely on extrinsic and rewards? And if so, like, do we have other examples of states that where this is successful? Just from the research side of like extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, extrinsic is usually short term, right? You got to keep moving that, like the carrot and the stick. You got to keep moving it, and so that's just something I want to be, I guess, mindful of. And I'm curious if we have any precedents elsewhere for things that have been long-term successful in this.
Thank you. I actually think about this a lot. And in lots of conversations with various stakeholders, specialized childcare providers, the Sparks and the STARS advisory committees, a lot of what comes out or is reinforced is that providers are asking why they should bother, since we have taken or we have standardized that base rate. And so while I also agree with you that quality is an intrinsic goal, it does seem like there is a segment or, perhaps even an overwhelming voice in our field that says, no, this is a lot of work and I want to be, I wouldn't say even rewarded, but I want to be somehow compensated for the amount of work that I'm doing. So
okay, that clarification I think is really helpful. So like, if I'm going to be putting more work and energy and time and capacity into doing this, then I want to be financially compensated for it. Feels different for me than the messaging of a reward for doing it.
Oh, I agree. I agree. If
maybe to note,
yeah,
in terms of communication to the field, even the idea of like, yeah, we don't want this to be an additional burden. Here's how we're going to financially support this, versus an acknowledgement, versus like, here's an incentive for you to do it.
And Courtney really has been stressing in our internal conversations the word of investment rather than incentive. And I myself like that very much, because I think what you're getting, it gives a different message entirely. So thank you. Claire.
Yeah, it's just to piggyback on what you just said. I think you said it well, and I know the specialized childcare RCIS staff is hearing the STARS pushback a lot, whether you can get behind it or not in terms of, but feeling actually devalued, like you losing that STARS bump kind of went the opposite way in terms of, you can say disincentivizing or not recognizing. I agree with all the language, but the feedback definitely is kind of a little bit of a devaluing of the effort. And if it's being paid at parity for someone, who hadn't put all that effort in, why should I? So we're really struggling in our region with childcare capacity, and I'm in Washington County, and specifically with specialized childcare, we have a high number of folks that that need specialized childcare capacity given what we have to offer. So I do like the ideas. I was just going to comment with positive, compensating, recognizing whatever the language is, but STARS, re-incentivizing somehow engagement and participation in the STARS system.
Yes, thank you. Lori.
Thanks, Dawn. Thanks for your work on this. I have a question and then maybe a comment based on the question. What's the timeline? And I'm sorry if I missed that. What's the timeline for implementation of these types of incentive payments?
So we are actively building, financial models right now. And so first sort of step is to build this financial model to see where we could jiggle these numbers and money. I did a very brief one for Janet and she was like, it's good to know. But we need an official one. So in terms of timeline, I cannot promise this, but I would really like to see this start by the end of July. We got readiness out and about fairly quickly. We've got a good framework. I've got a good understanding of the arc of what needs to happen. And so that's kind of my goal, but I mean, August at the latest. This is
So
my
my-
next, yeah.
So my comment is probably going to be unpopular, but I actually would encourage that these come at a later time. And I'll explain why. I think that the STARS process, as a program who is navigating this, as somebody who's navigated a NACE accreditation process multiple times, and now I'm navigating this new STARS process, it feels incomplete. It feels like a pilot with a lot of unknowns. And I think until there are more knowns, we don't really know what the process might be once we get through these pilot years, right? Right now, I can tell you, it feels incredibly arduous. And I have a team. It's not just me, right? Like I have a team of people working on this. It's felt complicated, not completely clear, sort of muddling through really important stuff. But I think until we have a clear, and we don't, I mean, we, of course, you always have a choice, but based on our commitments, we, of course, are going to participate in STARS. Like that's having the conversation about whether to do it or not is off the table. However, we don't really know what's involved until like the first sets of people get through this process, and then maybe it won't be as complicated, right? Like even Sparks they're going through it for the first time with programs. And so, and really, you know, we got the readiness payments, which helped our program so much. In some ways, like I wish it were possible for us to continue getting readiness payments until the new STARS program felt really solid. And I know that's probably not a possibility, but I think, and I mean, we need the money. Like I would love to have the incentives, but also like, I don't think we really know what's involved until we get through this pilot period. So it feels like putting something else in place, like without really having a solid grounding. Does that make sense? I'm sorry.
It does, and I appreciate, I do appreciate that. I do appreciate that. I know where you're coming from. Thank you. Sonia.
Dawn, can I ask a quick question? Was there
Sure.
a timeline in the legislation?
There is
or-
no, Sherry, you're
Okay.
back. There is not. So
Sorry,
unlike readiness, which had a pretty distinct deadline, this one does not. So it is possible that we could take longer. It may take longer. Yeah, right now, Ray's out right now, so I'm holding down a couple of forts. Keith just went out with a new baby, so I just said to Janet this morning, all my directors are gone. It's me. So yeah, I can't, that's my hope. I always hope, you know, as an early childhood program, I don't want to see something linger for a year and a half before it's launched. And Janet certainly shares that. Like, we don't want folks to be churning with the weight, but we are.
Sonia has her hand up.
Yes.
Thanks. So I always think I agree with Alyssa that, you know, there's this intrinsic versus extrinsic, and like Lori, for us, this is a non-option. It's not like, I mean, I could make it an option, but I don't, because we have a commitment just as a business and, you know, who we are. And so no matter what it looks like, we'll participate. But I also agree, being a program that's taking a couple of different new programs through the process, it is very, very cumbersome right now. Mostly because, you know, you're trying to figure it out. It's brand new. So the workload is huge, like in terms of A, figuring out this new system, and B, helping your staff through the system, because again, this is not something we should be doing as an administration to our programs. This is something we do for our programs for improvement. That word continuous improvement is what should be the main focus of the STAR system. And so if it's tied to anything, I would actually say that continuous improvement piece would be a thing to tie something to, when I think about your choices here. But I also know there's got to be the merit in helping people get to this extrinsic place, right? Where this is a commitment of quality. So I am a little leery to decide how much to put where or when and how before the pilot year. And I do agree, like, it would be nice to get it out, but I don't know that we know what this takes yet. I know I don't. And I'm on the STARS Oversight Committee. And it's because I haven't taken anything from beginning to end yet, you know? So I don't even know, but I can tell you, just for me to get training for my staff, like my directors and things, to understand, and then to put all the, you know, some new tools in place to be used, you know, all of this. I mean, I don't know, I think it might be worth hearing, and maybe it should be part of this process in the pilot years, that we're gathering information to hear from programs who are taking and directors and owners that are taking their programs through these processes. Like, what do they feel the best way to push this might be? Like, what's been tough? What should we be focused on? For me, I'd say something like CQI, but that may not be everybody's take on it.
Thank you. I
Thank
think
you,
Megan
sir.
and Elisa popped up there, yeah.
I wasn't sure you could see, Dawn, so I was.
I would completely agree with everything that Sonia just said. I think the other piece that I would add to that is this first year, and the first time that programs go through the new STARS system, I think we're going to see different needs than what we're going to see 5 years down the line. So whatever we build is necessarily going to need to be changed and revisited, because you know, for example, I'm hearing from home providers, I don't want to participate in this. It's a lot of work. Nobody really knows what it looks like, and my families and the community at large already knows I run a quality program, and so it's not going to benefit me in any way. Getting them to participate at all, I think, would involve having some kind of financial incentive. But once you're in the system, and I think once you have figured out, like, oh, these are the pieces that I'm wanting to focus on in terms of my program and quality improvement, that's going to be a completely different kind of conversation about continuing participation in STARS. And so those, to me at least, I think of them as really two separate buckets, and different ideas probably work better for those two different situations.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. You're all just making my little wheels go in a good way.
I
Alyssa.
think Alyssa.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
circling
sorry,
back.
Sharon.
Sorry. This is Mila. We go nurse in a second here, but I'm thinking of this kind of like, honestly, like B Corps, and the idea of like B Corps is an optional thing you can opt into to enhance the quality of your business and the impact it has. And the biggest pushback that B Corps gets is it's expensive and arduous to go through. And so I'm thinking about, like, I guess I'm hearing a lot of similar things here. Like, I don't think we can expect a program to go through it at their expense, right? So if they're going to have to dedicate X amount of staff time to it, or it's going to cost this much in full to navigate the process, I don't think that can come out of a program's pocket. And I wonder if those two are the same as like incentives to do it, or just like, yeah, we're going to make sure this doesn't cost you money to do in terms of time, et cetera, that it's going to take. And appreciate Sonia's acknowledgement of like, and we don't know what that's really going to entail yet. I think there's going to have to be flexibility with it going forward. But I think that's going to be important. I mean, if I was running a center and it was going to be costing us money to do it, you're de-incentivized there.
Yeah. I used to teach my students my life phrase, which was be the bamboo, strong but flexible. You always need to be ready to bend with whatever wind is trying to knock you over. Michelle, I think and then I'm going to move. I don't want to miss the other parts of the statute.
Just a quick question, Dawn. I didn't know if there was going to be a chance for the CDD to actually survey all of the childcare programs to see what would be most helpful for them. Because to Claire's point, you know, we're in the same boat up here in Franklin and Grand Isle, where specialized childcares are not willing, especially home ones, which were basically mostly home-based programs, are not. They're saying, what's the, you know, incentive for us to continue doing this while we're seeing more kids going to custody? So our CIS child care person who I sit next to is, you know, a little stressed about this. So, but, you know, just that way, you know, what is the incentive for centers to do this? What are the incentives for family homes where they are pretty much their only employee to do this?
I think that once we have a better sense of the framework, I don't want to be like, hey, field, look at this big hot mess of ideas and tell me what you think. I think once we have a better understanding of what we're sort of moving towards as a framework, that a survey will most likely occur. We just haven't, the room is still messy and locked, or not even locked, but just shut behind me. Thank you. So the next, the next part of the statute was increasing infant toddler capacity and maintaining existing infant toddler capacity. This isn't really all that different from language that we've seen before in other acts. So our ideas were perhaps an investment. I should start just saying that. An investment payment at increasing capacity. So we would see that through licensing. It might not just be infant toddler capacity. Perhaps it's capacity in a broader sense. Continuing funding those infant toddler capacity building grants that we have been. We've talked about some mini grants for equipment or other expanded definitions of capacity. Sometimes the things that those grants that, oh, I always mix them up. Make way for me, room for kids. I mess them up anyway. The
Make way for kids, Dawn.
Thank you.
Make way for kids, not ducklings.
I was at one point I said make room for me, and Janet said you've actually combined both. I'm like, well, they're in my brain. So these,
I just need to acknowledge they're both brilliant names for grant programs.
They are both brilliant names. I just sometimes my brain is so full of things that I forget little details. But you know, we realize that capacity means a bunch of different things. That capacity isn't simply building. You know, capacity is HVAC systems and making sure sewers are working and roofing problems. So it may not be fall under the sort of capacity building grants we offer now, but maybe we could offer some sort of mini grants for that. And then continuing the BTAP and other supports. So another pillar of this being TA around this capacity building. So I'm going to pause a moment. I think this is very similar to what we've been doing, so it's really not particularly surprising or. Okay, I'm going to move on.
Dawn, I do like the idea of like a mini grant program that is focused on capacity in a little bit different way. I think one of the things I hear from programs. So first of all, even with great investment, childcare programs are never going to have collateral in most cases, right? Like my friends at VCLF, I love this. They always say there's not a lot of money, there's not a lot of collateral in small tables and chairs. Like that is it. So I hear programs when they have HVAC needs or security needs or like related facility needs or a sewer change or even perimeter drain issues. Like they just really struggle to make those changes. And that's really about retaining spaces in a lot of cases. So I like that thinking around some kind of support for programs in that
I
way.
remember fencing being shockingly expensive.
Mhm.
Just be like, how much do I need to pay for extended fence? Terrific. Okay. Sonia and then Claire.
Yeah. Okay, Dawn, I won't keep interrupting you. You can see the hands.
You're good.
So I think the amounts matter in these. You know, mini grants in the past have been, I don't know, maybe up to 5,000 or so. They haven't been a lot. That might get you a good chunk of a play structure or something in your classroom. But something like an HVAC fix, even fencing in a playground, you know, you're talking 10, 20, 30, you're talking a lot of money. So I think when we're thinking about how you're thinking like, how is this constructed? And what are the purposes for these things, right? Equipment grants are different to me than something that can be used more broadly to like fix your roof and fencing and HVAC systems. And, you know, there's, again, sort of like the STARS money we're talking about, there's capacity building, right? Like building the capacity, the ability for somebody to move into a space next to them and start up a new infant or toddler program, right? And what it takes to get that far. But then there's the ongoing cost, because no matter how you slice it in this business, it costs more to work with the youngest children for your business. So, you know, is there ongoing incentives for that? Like like, how do we kind of get people in both directions, getting the capacity built for more spaces of availability and then the ability to maintain that portion of their program? So I don't know. These are just things I'm thinking about.
No, I appreciate this.
You know, whether it helps. I know in the past, long time ago, I got a infant toddler grant. I mean, like 10 years ago, literally. It's how I moved my infant program from where it was down the road up here. And it also allowed me, it had enough flexibility in there to allow me to have an extra staff member, which over time I've managed to put in the budget and kept. So, right, so our infants are 8 infants and 3 teachers as opposed to 2. So, but that grant was the start of that. So it's sort of like, how do you continue it till people can sustain? Anyway, just thoughts of.
I think one of the important things is that this is state money. This isn't federal money. So the stipulations that sit on the federal money, which is what we've been using through ARPA and through the CCDF quality funds, they have a different definition of what those dollars can be used for. We have because it's state money, we have a less defined, I mean, it's still defined, but it's not defined in no major construction, no, you know, in the same way that I think the grants have been defined up till now. So it's why, for instance, we could do the readiness payments was because it was state money and not federal money. So just to kind of throw that context out. Claire.
Yeah, again, I feel like just piggybacking a little on what, or a lot on what Sonia had just said, but the 3 things that I think pop up a lot in the field is that infant toddler ratio. So 2 to 8 is incredibly challenging. Anyone who's done that for 8 hours a day, it's just exhausting. So the 3 to 8 ratio, or 3 to 9, getting like a licensing variance and having 3 to 9. So incentivizing an infant toddler program to build out or capacity, in my mind, doesn't really meet the core root, which is infant teacher burnout, because it's exhausting and ratios are really hard to financially support a 3 to 8 or 3 to 9 teaching ratio. So looking at incentivizing payments for programs to at least allow you know, a 0.5 FTE to support part of the time a 2 to or 3 to 8 ratio, or I keep going to 3 to 9. I mean, I know that means a variance. We've done that in the past though, but it means we can increase our capacity. The demand we all know is off the chart for that age group. But the challenge is also finding staff. But if we can prevent burnout and increase with infant toddler focused ratio support, that's one idea. The other is like around the idea, and I know this sounds like left field and it doesn't belong in this conversation, but I am going to say it, which is tuition based. And I know there's a lot of loan forgiveness now in place for folks that are pursuing early ed or early those specific degrees, but I'm hiring folks that have psych backgrounds, sociology, a lot of related fields, elementary, art students are really interested in the work, and there's no loan forgiveness specifically in this field right now for them. What about if there are pots of money that where I was talking to Allie Richards about this yesterday, and she nibbled, she was like, oh my God, but like, we have to widen the gate in terms of who we're taking into our program so we can keep staff and enroll kids, period, right now. That's the situation we're in. And I'm looking at a variety of backgrounds when we're hiring. So is there any loan forgiveness, small amounts of money just to incentivize young folks that maybe want to get in the field but have an art degree or have a different background? So, and then the third thing is program specific build outs. So gardening programs, like having incentives for our staff are super hot to build an outdoor classroom. I know that that's really popular in a lot of programs already, but that takes a bunch of money to to pivot and to add and to make sure it meets licensing requirements. And so maybe there's specific like programmatic curriculum-based build outs that could be incentivized, or our garden program, which is huge. And it also takes money to kind of support and get a little, whatever, get X, Y, and Z to support that. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Alyssa.
Hello. Love so much of what you said, Sonia. I think that it's so key. We know that we lose money on infant toddler. You try to make up for it in preschool, pre-K to keep business afloat. And frankly, infant toddler is a bad business decision if we're providing quality care. And so there has to be compensation for that in order for it to make sense for a program to continue to provide and increase capacity for infant toddler. And tied in there is that acknowledgement that Sonia made of the 2 to 8 ratio is going to continue to lead to higher burnout. And so popping that third teacher in there is going to be key to keeping teachers, which we know is all filtered into, do we have capacity? And it costs even more to have another teacher in there, but it's going to be huge for the success of that classroom, coming from a former infant toddler teacher. And it's really, really hard. So yeah, cheers. It's exhausting. And so I think making it financially feasible to provide high quality care or even offer infant toddler care at all is going to be crucial there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I always, as a director, I would say that my infant toddler wing was my philanthropic gift to the community. In my first classroom, we were 12 to 3. So but we stayed together for years, which was lovely, but it was a lot. It was busy. So I appreciate the rationale behind lowering ratios and giving high quality care and saving teachers' mental health and sanity. So thank you. Let's see. Okay. Oops. So the next part of the statute is establishing capacity in regions of the state that are identified by the commissioner as underserved and providing non-standard hours of childcare services. So some ideas right now what we're doing, because my first response was the whole state is underserved. We can just take the whole state. And we got back comment that was like, no, that's not what the legislature intended, Dawn. So right now, actually Helen in our division is doing some research specifically in the Vermont context of what is underserved. So we can have a clear definition so that we can then target whatever whatever we start to look at programmatically towards this goal in order to know exactly and to be able to provide a clear definition. Supporting the development and expansion of family childcare through the state. And then finally, and Beth Maurer and I are just at the beginning of this, is researching friends, family, and neighbor care. It hasn't been something that's been offered in Vermont in the past. Sometimes it's called license exempt in other states. There's a lot of CCDF requirements in order to offer this kind of care, but we have talked about it internally as an option that many parents might want to take advantage of, a sort of natural solution for many families who are looking for non-standard hours of care. They would rather their child be with a friend or a relative. So we're just at the beginning. And I actually think at another ELD meeting, someone mentioned this and I thought, haha, we're starting to research it. Diane.
Yeah, that legally exempt used to be available in Vermont, and was really frowned upon and pushed aside. So I would just make sure that as you're having those conversations, you tap into that historical, everything old is new again. So we know that it comes around, but I would just check in, around that because yes, for many of our rural families, that's our only options when we have,
I think there's levels to this conversation, right? There's what does OCC, the feds, need for this to even be allowable for reimbursement for childcare? There's rates. There's a lot of, and the requirements, frankly, by the OCC are not dissimilar from registered and licensed childcare providers. They really are not dissimilar. So what would be, now I'm getting into the discussion, like what would be the pros and cons? But I agree with you in rural areas of Vermont where infant toddler care is very far away, or care period is very far away or not meshing with your work schedules. We're not going to be able to build childcare centers in every one of those communities. So I think we have to look differently.
I've talked to Beth about this a few times. I think we also have to look at like what is available for regulated care in terms of what are the regulations. So there's a lot of rural states that are like removing the resident requirement for family childcare homes. So if I had a family childcare home and my daughter wanted to run it and she lives 2 miles down the road, she's able to continue my childcare program in my home, or family style childcare in small spaces, like in a town center building. And so there's some of the other, some other states are looking at ways to make childcare more accessible in rural areas and still have some ability to, some oversight to make sure that children are safe and well cared for and prepared.
And OCC is saying they need to be inspected. It is very similar. So we're also working with OCC and their TA folks to do exactly what you're saying. Look at the broad landscape nationally of what is happening, what is feasible for a small, Washington, D.C. has great non-standard hour care, but Vermont is not going to build that specific kind of capacity because we just don't have the type of demand that. So sorry, I'm making this into that particular discussion, but yes, Beth and I are we're starting to really dig into that. I'm going to move on. I want to make sure we get so this is the final one, which is completing a commissioner approved training on protective or family support services and other quality or capacity specific criteria, and that we will maintain an incentive payment schedule on our website. So we've we have thought about specific support of specialized childcare through these incentive investment payments, or specifically something around specialized childcare. And then we've also thought about ways to infuse strengthening families in a deeper programmatic individual level across the state, and have those childcare providers writ large trained in the strengthening families framework. So not a ton of ideas, so please, Sonia.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this or thinking about it wrong. So supporting specialized childcare is, to me, connected to supporting STARS, right? Because you have to be working toward that as part of that specialized childcare, right? You have to have a CQI, you have to have a plan to get to 3-star, right? Like, isn't it all
Yes.
sort of tied together?
Well, I think Jill would also say that there are ways to incentivize providers becoming or staying as specialized childcare. So she's an integral voice in this part of the discussion, is to talk about how to build capacity, which is obviously through STARS as well. It is tied together, or making sure that the 2-star provisional programs are moving indeed to 3 stars, perhaps through specific financial support. So maybe a higher differential rate for children. You know, we have a very small differential rate, but a higher differential rate. So those are just some ideas we're kicking around at first, but Jill will always be part of those discussions.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me, and I agree. It is kind of, there's different points at which the incentive, I just mean that in that you have to be in STARS to do, it's sort of a connector, and how do we make those? I actually, you just mentioned something with regards to the higher differential. I could see that being super handy in a lot of ways, right? Like you're often the children that are being served through specialized childcare also come with some challenges and that mean more time and staff potentially from programs. So I think that higher differential is an interesting idea for helping programs be able to financially support some of that for kids. So
I agree. Yeah, we're always actually the strengthening or the specialized childcare discussion comes up a lot. We talk about ways to recruit, retain, like support. How are we building that holistic system for the children and families that are utilizing specialized childcare, and also the providers who are caring for those children and families. So, yeah. Hi, Sherry.
So Don, a couple things. I think I really appreciate Alyssa starting us off way back and thinking about the word incentive and how we're using that. And like to me, that's more of like a service payment or some other acknowledgement rather than being incentivized for every little. And honestly, like when I was a program director, I think Sonia said something really similar, like for all the work that I did because I wanted to, along with the staff, serve children and families in the best way ever. Like to get $1,000 was like, was weird. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't really, I mean, in my organization, the best thing about it was that it was $1,000 I had complete control over, that I could say, we're going to buy this with for all of us. That was like but it wasn't, it was almost like an insult, honestly, but it was like some of the only money I had complete control over. So that was the exciting part. But the other thing I wanted to talk about specialized care, and maybe this has changed, but this is what I'm hearing, is that the reimbursement or the incentive or the service incentive for that is through CCFAP. And if you have not only children who qualify for CCFAP have special service needs, right? So how is service to those children included in that acknowledgement that it does take additional resources on programs to serve all children? do we have a system now that like has happened since my time providing direct service?
So I
Because
think if I'm in my mind, I'm connecting what you're saying to the idea of inclusion in a broader
in a broader sense,
in a
because
broader
when I
sense.
when I was providing direct service, there were children with significant supports needed in the programs that I worked in that didn't qualify for CCFAP. And so there was, like, our mission was to serve all children in inclusive manner. And we could do that because I was part of probably a larger organization that managed the money outside of me. But like other programs wouldn't have been able to serve
Yeah.
the kids with the assistance that we provided. So
Yeah.
I just like I never really understood why it was targeted only through CCFAP, and kids who did not qualify for CCFAP were at a disadvantage in getting early ed and childcare services and private programs because there was no acknowledgement or reimbursement for any services that they may require or resources because of the needs that they may have, which could include additional training. It could include, special medical attention that needed to be brought in. There were a lot of different, sometimes it included completely restructuring rooms.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Well, first, I'm hoping that some of those families who were previously not eligible are going to be eligible. So that would be partially an assistance for the family. But yeah, I mean, the whole SAGs versus inclusion discussion is so different than what we're talking about now, but it's a big discussion. So what SAGs was intended to do, what inclusion really means, how do we serve? But we're talking about it. We're starting to talk about it and get a definition, and that then means we can message the definition of where the differences are. So yeah, that is a different closet I've got. So that's it. That was my last slide. Stop sharing. Oh, there we go. And I think we're just about out of time, but I really do appreciate the conversation, and I'm going to go back and consolidate my notes. Oh, sure, Claire.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, I think you're doing that. I'm just curious what the next steps are. I think I remember in the beginning, you kind of set the table for what you're gonna do, but can you remind us next steps, please? Thank you.
Sure. So I'm putting the readiness payments to bed. I think an email just came from budget where we're now starting to build the financial models so that we can look at various options. Like this is what we did with readiness. We kind of built an Excel, and then we could plug in amount of programs and money and jiggle. Once we get a better structure, I hope to have a survey out to the field, again, not unlike readiness, and then take that data, which folks respond fairly quickly, take that data and then move forward with a potential semi-final model to then share with folks. So that is my deadline, or timeline. And now I'm reconsidering the timeline of when that would be launched, but that's the general framework that I'm working under. Plus, we'll be getting the responses from the readiness payments. So I'm wondering if that's going to inform some of the way we design the quality and capacity. I'm very excited about those surveys coming back as they do.
Thanks, Dawn. So I put a couple questions in the chat that I'd like to spend the next 9 or 10 minutes just hearing from people. So the questions that we want to capture, is there anything you heard today that you feel you want more information about, which we could set up in a future meeting? We did talk about having Corinne, the parent representative on UPK, come to a future meeting. So we will make a note of that. Is there anything else? And then anything else you feel needs more action? And then anything you heard today that should kind of go in our list of policy recommendations for 2025, and just feel free to throw things in the chat, or just go ahead and share. I don't think you don't have to hand raise. We can just pop in.
I'll popcorn. I'm wondering if there's a role in this committee, and people can tell me it's not under our charge, to do some sort of recommendation around, the term isn't best practices anymore, but around like rounding in developmentally appropriate practice. I heard that come through as a theme in all of the presentations and panels today. And just really thinking about that piece. That's what's sitting with me today.
Thanks, Becca. Others? And Sonia, and do you mean, are you jumping on what Becca said around the?
Yeah, just in terms of terminology or whatever we're thinking, but you know, I know best practices is a term we're kind of steering away from, but you know, they are, NAEYC's been mentioned a bunch of times, and you know, we know what research tells us is the best thing to do, right? Is the right thing to do, is the effective thing to do. And that's why I was just suggesting like research.
The new DAP is absolutely positively jam-packed with research-based practice.
But I even mean so much as in when we think about UPK, like what does research tell us about 3 and 4-year-olds and transitions? What does that tell us about continuity of care? What does it tell us about, like, what do we know to be true? And how do we go from there?
And I think if it's popcorn style, I would just chime in with, I think just anything we can do right now to hold the field with like still kid gloves, right? It is a lot of us have been around a long time. I feel like it's in more of a fragile state still, unfortunately, than I've ever seen it. So I feel like just kid gloves, like love support, like wider berths, wider gates, more flexibility, more less rigidity, more flexibility, and just support it just being in existence for continuity for the next 5 years. That's my hope, and that kids and families need us all to be around.
Thank you, Claire. Yep. And Michelle, thank you. I do think getting some people to come and have a discussion on specialized childcare and some of those gaps would be that has been on our list here and there, and definitely came up a lot today. So other feedback for policy recommendations, actions, other topics, even if it's not related to what we talked about today, but there's other in the early childhood world that you're thinking of that we should get more information about, or concerns you're hearing that we might want to tackle and try to find how we can lead a discussion. I will say that in May, we do have a couple meeting topics. First Children's Finance did a state of childcare businesses in Vermont, which is a follow-up to the study they did last year. So they're going to present And then BBF is going to begin leading us in crafting our policy recommendations for 2025. So those are two things on our May agenda.
Sherry, the timing might work to do a June regroup of this panel. Not to bog us all down in Act 76, but that seems like that's the switchover point, right? Where we're starting to synthesize, which might be when we want to make a game plan for this committee to get involved in that testimony piece later in the summer.
Mhm. I definitely was, when I was pulling up the timeline, I agree. I was thinking ELD, we should insert ourselves in that feedback loop for sure. If that's June or July, if we're on time, it'd be June. It might be July or August. We'll see.
I'm also thinking about this group in summer and commitment and meetings, but yes.
Does anyone have any other feedback or any announcements that you want to make or questions?
I was just going to share quickly that we're working on the CCDF plan for 25 through 27. So there will be opportunities for feedback on the plan. We're furiously writing it right now because the feds didn't give us the final preprint until about a month ago, and we've got to have it in by July 1st. So we will be sharing that with you as soon as we have it in a more complete format.
Cool. One of the things I'm wondering about maybe for a discussion, certainly before October, is, part of our role was really to kind of, to be involved in Act 76 implementation and monitoring those specific pieces. And we did, we've been doing that regularly at our meetings. And one of the things I'm hearing a lot about is around CCFAP eligibility outreach. I'm hearing about how are families finding out. I'm hearing about unintended challenges that some families have in eligibility. And so I wonder if maybe a future meeting could really be focused on that piece of work, because I think that's a really important part of the investment, is that we are paying attention to how families are finding out about it and what our take-up rate is for families. So that might be maybe a panel of kind of maybe talk through with the committee, or if you have ideas on who you think or what you think would be a good setup for that discussion, that would be great too. That might be another topic maybe for June, or if we skip a little bit of maybe August or September, because October will be when the most families are experiencing eligibility. All right.
Is
Yes,
is there a time frame for this group to look at the early MTSS work and a status update to this group?
There is not, but we can add that to our
ongoing overwhelming list.
Yes. No, this is very, very helpful. We typically tackle about 2 topics a meeting, so it's great to have all of these brains thinking about things we should be paying attention to. Thanks, Claire.
I just think it's a nice perspective to hear from the field instead of just us. I would love to invite, get a statewide panel of actually folks doing the work in CIS childcare as well as CCFAP, because I hear the feedback. We offer both in our region, and I hear the feedback all the time.
And I would piggyback with Claire because I hear them too, because I sit in the same office as all of them. I think some of the questions that we always have, to add to what you were talking about, Sherry, is that as more people can apply for CCFAP, if they're not already in childcare, is there capacity to put them in if they already don't have a childcare slot? So I think that's something that we're always thinking about, because it goes back to the capacity issue.
And if either of you have individuals you would recommend, that would be great. I do know a few months ago, before Anna came on board as our BBF person, Beth had been trying to line up some discussion around this and was kind of struggling on who on the panel and who we could get. So if any of you have some good recommendations of people you think would be really great for this discussion, please send them my way. Would love to have that support in finding the right resources for the discussion. Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest. Yeah, Tamina. Thanks, Beg.